The courtroom was tense, every eye fixed on the proceedings as the judge prepared to address a critical matter, a clear violation of the motion in limine. The motion had been established to protect the fairness of the trial, strictly prohibiting either party from introducing certain evidence or questioning witnesses on specific topics without first obtaining approval from the bench. In this case, the focus was the alleged bad acts of the victim, Mark Anthony Salivar, and the court's instructions were unequivocal. Any questioning related to these acts had to be approached before the jury. The defense, however, had ignored this rule, creating a flashpoint that threatened the integrity of the trial. "You are aware of the motion in limine and the limitations it imposes," the judge began, his voice firm but measured. "Whether or not you attempted to circumvent it in questioning the witness is now under scrutiny." The courtroom fell silent. Counsel for the defense shifted uneasily, knowing they had crossed a procedural line. The violation wasn't trivial. It directly challenged the court's authority and the procedural safeguards meant to ensure impartiality. The defense argued that they were simply attempting to elicit prior statements from the witness. Yet the court was unyielding. The law required that any discussion of prior bad acts be vetted outside the presence of the jury. By questioning the witness about items in Mark's possession, specifically personal belongings that could be interpreted as wrongful acts, the defense had violated the order. The judge instructed that the witness step down while the counsel took their client aside. This was not merely a procedural reprimand, it was a clear warning that any repetition could have severe consequences, including potential sanctions or evidentiary exclusions. As the witness exited the stand, the judge elaborated on the violation. "This is not a matter of opinion, this is a matter of law. The motion in limine exists to prevent prejudice and ensure the jury remains focused only on relevant evidence. By asking questions about the victim's alleged acts, you have undermined the purpose of this motion." The defense attempted to clarify their intent, stressing that the questions pertained to prior statements, not truth. Yet the court reminded them that the procedural misstep was already committed. Proper protocol would have required them to approach the bench and request guidance before asking any question that touched upon prohibited topics. The judge's tone intensified as he emphasized the importance of adhering to procedural safeguards. "You cannot proceed as though the motion in limine does not apply. Any attempt to introduce such material without prior approval constitutes a violation. This is not negotiable." Counsel for the defense acknowledged the ruling but maintained that their intent was not to prejudice the jury. Nonetheless, the court insisted that intent was irrelevant. The fact remained that the rules had been breached. At the center of this dispute was Ms. Joanna Reyes, a key witness whose prior statements and interactions with the victim had become the focal point of the defense's strategy. The defense sought to highlight discrepancies in her account, suggesting that she may have been inconsistent in her testimony to law enforcement, in previous proceedings, and in statements made to third parties. While challenging a witness's credibility is a standard practice, it must be done within the bounds of court rules. Here, the defense had failed to secure approval before raising sensitive matters, turning a tactical maneuver into a procedural infraction. The court meticulously reviewed the situation. "Counsel, you were provided with clear instructions. Any exploration of the victim's alleged wrongs requires bench approval. You failed to do so. The violation has been noted, and any questions relating to these topics must be disregarded by the jury." The judge's words underscored the gravity of the error. Procedural rules in high-stakes trials are not merely formalities. They are safeguards designed to protect both parties and ensure justice is served. As the trial resumed, the judge carefully instructed the jury to disregard any questions that had been asked in violation of the motion in limine. Do not consider these questions or any answers given in relation to them. They are not part of the evidence and must have no influence on your deliberations. The courtroom held its collective breath as the defense absorbed this ruling, realizing that their strategy had been compromised by their own oversight. The defense's counsel attempted to mitigate the impact by explaining that their intention was solely to establish prior statements for impeachment purposes. Yet the court noted that even this intent did not excuse the procedural breach. The motion in limine was explicit. Any discussion of the victim's alleged acts whether to impeach credibility or for any other purpose, required pre-approval. The defense's argument highlighted a common tension in trial law: the balance between zealous representation and adherence to procedural rules. While attorneys must advocate vigorously for their clients, they cannot bypass rules designed to maintain fairness and impartiality. The witness, Ms. Reyes, was now off the stand, but the implications of the violation loomed large. Every question that had been asked about the victim's alleged prior acts was tainted by the breach, forcing the court to intervene repeatedly to clarify the boundaries. The defense had inadvertently introduced the risk of prejudice, even if no substantive evidence had been obtained. This procedural misstep demonstrated the high stakes of courtroom strategy. An oversight could jeopardize the defense's credibility and potentially influence the jury's perception of the case. The judge then shifted focus to potential remedies. While the violation was serious, it did not automatically merit a new trial. The court explained that a motion for a new trial would only succeed if the breach materially affected the fairness of the trial or the jury's ability to reach an impartial verdict. In this instance, the judge determined that the violation could be managed by instructing the jury to disregard the improper questions. The jury has been directed to ignore any questions or answers that violated the motion in limine. This remedial measure is sufficient to preserve the integrity of the trial, the judge stated. Despite this, the courtroom atmosphere remained charged. Both parties understood the delicate balance between legal strategy and procedural compliance. The defense's goal had been to challenge the credibility of Ms. Reyes, a witness whose testimony could significantly influence the outcome of the case. Yet by failing to follow the proper protocol, the defense risked undermining their own position. The court's firm enforcement of the rules served as a critical reminder. In trial law, procedural adherence is as vital as substantive argument. As Part 1 of this courtroom saga concludes, the tension between strategy and procedure has set the stage for further confrontation. The defense must now navigate the remainder of the trial with care, mindful that any further deviation from established rules could be catastrophic. The motion in limine, intended to ensure fairness, has highlighted the fine line attorneys walk between aggressive advocacy and procedural compliance. As the trial resumed, the tension shifted from procedural reprimands to the practical implications of the evidence. Central to the defense's argument was access to NCIC and TCIC records, federal and state databases containing criminal histories for the parties involved. These records had been provided to the defense prior to jury selection, yet strict limitations prevented copying, photographing, or removing them from the courtroom. What seemed like a minor restriction now became a critical point. Without full access, the defense argued, they could not adequately prepare for cross-examination or impeachment. The judge listened carefully as defense counsel explained their position. Your Honor, we were handed the NCIC and TCIC records, yes, but the restrictions imposed prevented us from making full use of them. The attorney began, voice steady but firm. We could not photocopy, photograph, or otherwise retain the documents to review outside of court hours. This limitation impaired our ability to challenge inconsistencies in witness statements, particularly concerning Joanna Reyes and her prior testimony. The court acknowledged the explanation but emphasized the importance of adhering to the law. Counsel, the dissemination of criminal history information is governed by federal regulations, specifically Title 28, Part 20, and by Texas Government Code 411.083. These laws impose limitations to protect sensitive information. Your inability to duplicate the documents was a legal requirement, not an oversight by the prosecution. Yet the defense pressed on, highlighting the practical implications. With all due respect, Your Honor, providing the records but preventing their use as intended is effectively limiting our ability to perform a meaningful cross-examination. In a trial where credibility and prior statements are central, this restriction constitutes a significant disadvantage to the defense. The purpose of discovery is to ensure a fair trial. Without the ability to engage with these records fully, we cannot adequately represent our client. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Jurors leaned forward, sensing the significance of these technical legal arguments on the larger trial narrative. NCIC and TCIC records were not just paperwork. They were a critical tool for impeachment, capable of exposing inconsistencies in witness statements or verifying prior actions. In a case where the stakes included lengthy prison sentences, the defense argued that restricting access went beyond procedural inconvenience. It could have affected the outcome of the trial itself. The prosecutor responded with measured authority. The records were provided to the defense as required. The limitation against copying or photographing exists to prevent misuse of sensitive criminal history information. The defense had full access during court hours and could cross-examine witnesses accordingly. Any alleged disadvantage is a consequence of the law itself, not misconduct by the prosecution. Despite the prosecutor's assertion, the defense maintained that the restriction created an acute and specific harm. They argued that certain prior statements by witnesses, especially Joanna Reyes, could not be effectively reviewed in real time, forcing the defense to rely on memory and notes. "This is not a theoretical issue, Your Honor," the attorney continued. "It goes to the heart of due process. We cannot ensure that our clients' rights are fully protected when procedural barriers prevent meaningful engagement with evidence that directly impacts credibility." The court paused, weighing the arguments carefully. This was not a simple dispute over evidence. It was a clash between the letter of the law and its practical application in a high-stakes trial. The judge recognized the defense's frustration but emphasized that compliance with legal protocols was non-negotiable. "Counsel, while I understand your concerns, the law clearly restricts duplication and removal of these records. The remedy, if any, lies within the procedures established by the courts for motions, not by circumventing the rules." As the cross-examination proceeded, attention returned to the witness's testimony. Questions about Mark Anthony Salivar's possession of certain items, condoms, lubricant, and a new outfit in his backpack, had previously raised objections under the motion in limine. The defense argued that these inquiries were relevant for assessing the credibility of prior statements and the witness's account of events. Yet the court reiterated that any discussion of such bad acts required prior approval, which had not been sought. "Witness, you stated previously that you did not observe any of these items personally, correct?" the defense attorney asked carefully, treading within the court's restrictions. "Your testimony regarding these items is based solely on what was told to you by others?" "Yes, that is correct," the witness replied. Her tone was cautious but clear, reflecting the gravity of the proceedings. The court reminded the jury again. "Members of the jury, you are instructed to disregard any prior questions or answers regarding these items that were asked in violation of the motion in limine. They must not influence your assessment of the evidence." The repeated caution underscored the importance of separating procedural violations from substantive testimony, a delicate balance in any trial. The discussion then shifted to events in the vehicle leading up to the alleged incident. The defense sought to clarify the sequence of events, including interactions among multiple individuals in the car and the discovery of items in the backpack. The witness recounted that a physical altercation ensued when tensions escalated, culminating in Mark being ejected from the vehicle after a struggle. Each detail was scrutinized under the lens of prior statements and consistency with police reports. Objections flew back and forth, the courtroom a tense battlefield of legal argumentation. Relevance, hearsay, and proper impeachment were invoked repeatedly, highlighting the intricate dance of trial advocacy. The judge intervened as necessary, sustaining objections when questions strayed into prohibited territory and overruling when the defense stayed within legal bounds. This rigorous enforcement of rules ensured that the trial remained fair and that the jury received only admissible evidence. Another critical point involved discrepancies in the witness's testimony regarding her relationship with Mr. McIntyre. At times, she claimed to be his girlfriend. At other times, she denied a romantic relationship. These inconsistencies were vital for the defense to explore credibility. Yet the court reminded counsel that any questioning, touching on potential prior bad acts of the victim, still required approach under the motion in limine. The defense was careful to navigate this fine line, seeking to establish impeachment without violating procedural rules. The NCIC and TCIC records again came under scrutiny, particularly regarding the ability to verify prior convictions and criminal history of key witnesses. The defense argued that access to these records was essential for proper cross-examination and for responding to statements made during opening arguments. The prosecution countered that the records had been provided in accordance with the law and that any restrictions were intended to prevent misuse, not to impede defense strategy. As the morning session concluded, it was clear that the courtroom drama extended beyond the case itself. The careful interplay of rules, motions, and evidence highlighted the complexity of legal advocacy. The defense faced the challenge of balancing aggressive representation with procedural compliance, while the prosecution navigated the fine line between enforcing the law and ensuring a fair trial. The audience, including the jury, witnesses, and attorneys, was left acutely aware of the stakes. Every decision, every objection, and every ruling had consequences, shaping the trajectory of the trial and the ultimate pursuit of justice. As Part 2 closes, the focus remains on the critical balance of evidence, credibility, and procedure, the pillars of any trial that seeks to uphold fairness in the most complex of legal disputes.